Hi everyone, this video is to go through how to do cluster analysis using PSPP. In learning how to use the PSP software and its quirks and differences from SPSS, I discovered that some of the things that are taken for granted in SPSS require extra steps in PSPP. And cluster analysis is the worst offender here. So I'm going to use the Delhi Depot data, but the same principles apply no matter what kind of data we're using. I'm just being consistent. So in the Delhi Depot data, you can see this has been imported in from SPSS, and it has the variable that SPSS automatically creates when you select save as part of your cluster analysis test. However, in PSPP, there is no automatic way in order to create this variable when running a cluster analysis, so there are extra steps involved. So I'm just going to go through these extra steps. So to do a cluster analysis in PSPP, you go to Analyze K-means cluster, and the items that we're using in the regular lecture were X1 and X3, so these are set there. And unlike in SPSS, where you do exploratory clusters first in order to determine how many clusters you need, in PSPP you need to tell it how many clusters to make. And that's that number of clusters item down here on the right. Because I've already done this in SPSS, I know the number of clusters I want is 2. In PSPP, you might want to start with 2, do 3, do 4, do 5, and see which one gets you the best results in terms of distinguishing the means between the groups. I'll show you what I mean in a second. So there's nothing else to do here. I simply say OK. And then my output, sorry, that's a different set of output. The output you will get is this bit down the bottom on the left. And the clusters here you see in PSPP, it gives you simply the mean scores for each cluster group. So for cluster 1, it is 3 out of 10 for friendly employees and 7 out of 10 for competent employees. And for cluster 2, it's 4 out of 10 for friendly employees, but 9 out of 10 for competent employees. So cluster 1 is lower in both friendly and competence or perceptions of than cluster 2. It also tells you how many respondents fall into each cluster. However, what we don't get is this information about which one of our respondents falls into each of these categories, so we can then use that information for an ANOVA analysis or a discriminant analysis or other forms of analysis that we need to do in order to really understand what is going on in each cluster. So the way to get around this is to export your output, which is File, Export, and I'm going to put this on the desktop just for ease sake. I need to give it a name, so cluster 1, and in this case I want it in a text file. So I select text down the bottom left and I say save. So I have done this previously, so my text file will emerge looking like this. And the reason we want this is we want the syntax for the cluster analysis that we have just run, which is this section here that we have talked about previously. So I copy that, Control C, I shorten this and I go to my Delhi Depot data and I go new File, New Syntax, and I get my syntax window and I paste this cluster analysis information in there. And then I move my cursor in front of the full stop and I select Enter, And what I want to add here is, sorry, I need to add the following information in order for it to give me which one of my respondents belongs to which cluster. So it is I'll put in all caps, print equals cluster with the full stop, leave it there, and then I select run all. And my output has recreated that cluster analysis, but now I also have this information here, which is a table that shows, because in this data we have 200 respondents, so each one of these respondents has been classified as being a member of either cluster 1 or cluster 2. So now what I need to do is export this so I can integrate this information into my regular data set. So to do this, I do File, Export, and I'm going to call this Cluster 2. Oops, daisy, I still have caps lock on. Cluster 2, I'm going to put it on the desktop again for ease, but instead I'm going to export it as comma separated values, a .csv file. And I select Save. So then I get my CSV file, which will open in Excel, and I can go to that table where everyone has been allocated into a cluster, and I'm going to select both rows so I can make sure that I are pasting it in correctly. So I copy, I go to my Delhi Depot data. Because of the way Delhi Depot works, I need to create 2 more variables. So I have 2 rows I can paste my data into. So I'm going to call the first one respondent number. And then the second one I'm going to call cluster 2, 2_1. The same principle that the SPSS used, or the same approach to naming that SPSS used. Oh, I've already got something called cluster 2, so I need to call it something else. So I'm going to call it clue 2_2. So we then go to the data view and we see my 2 new variables. I can click just here and I can click paste, and as we can see, respondent 1 is now respondent number 1 here, and all the way down I'm just going to check the last one to make sure that they also match up. So 200 is 200, so I am happy that my clusters in terms of respondents have matched up. So I select respondent number and I clear variables. So now I have my newly created clusters with my respondents allocated to each cluster, ready for me to do the rest of the analysis. So that is how to do a full and complete cluster analysis and allocating your respondents to a cluster in PSPP.